I am going to be dealing with the aspect of the architecture of the state, with the specific focus on where the issue of the marketization has been confused with the modernization of the state. If we are looking at the major questions that we need to ask comparatively, one of the things that we are asking is, why have some countries advanced, with respect to public sector reform, which has benefited civil society immensely, but others just plodder along? And also, why have some countries taken similar or different reform paths within the public sector, and yet we're basically delivering on more or less the same things to citizens with regards to our mandates? Could the answers lie in the systemic arrangements embedded in the architecture of the state? And I want to posit that definitely the systemic arrangements are the answer to a number of the challenges that have been raised here today. We cannot underestimate or neglect the role and the structure of the state as a crucial player in influencing the direction and the pace of public sector reform. But just because public administration overemphasizes continuity and the predictability of a change, it doesn't mean that the state basically doesn't have a role to play. But if one is looking at the prevalent discursive debates which influence the discourse around the aspect of the architecture of the state, with respect to issues at a macro policy level, we basically see the treasury issue that was raised this morning. It's typically around resources, how those particular resources are utilized, how these resources impact on policies and how these policies are implemented, and also how the social impact change happens and about the central local decision-making structural arrangements, specifically with regards to at a local level and at a central level. By and large, we've had 4 thematic phases. The 94 to the 99 period, which saw the theme of rationalization and policy development. The second phase was 99 to 2004, that saw the modernization and the implementation phase. The third was the accelerating implementation, the functionality, and looking at the integrated utility of services, specifically with regards to the different spheres and the joint of government, and the draft legislative framework to try and deal with that. But the 2009-2010 period, and I'm glad my colleagues from the performance monitoring and evaluation sector of government are here, is the period for measurement and oversight. I think the nub of the issue and the problem lies with the whole corporatism as a form of state. What Jessup is raising around corporatism, that corporatism therefore becomes a new form of state in a market economy in which decision-making no longer takes place through legislative politics and bureaucratic rational legal authority, but through public cooperations in which legislative and bureaucratic powers are fused. And clearly we've seen that with the number of our state entities, and the accountability also dwindles when there is a problem with regards to the delivery of particular services, the ESCOMs and the CETAs and so forth. The aspect of the decentralization and the devolution of authority, that came from new public management. The consideration of the most cost-effective and efficient way of service delivery using markets as reference points, that came from new public management. The citizen was then turned into a customer. Whether the citizen could pay or not, we turned them into a customer, and yet we had obligations towards the citizen. We also looked at very dubious ways in which we benchmarked and measured performance, in the way in which the private sector did, and yet clearly they were incompatible in many instances. But the issue in the way in which how we introduce ICTs, the jury is out in that we waited for private sector vendors to dictate to government what was needed in government. It wasn't government saying the pace at which government wanted to evolve in terms of the modernization of the state. And there's a lot of public money spent that has been wasted through this whole public management paradigm in our endeavor to go on into what we call the blink culture of the public service, where there's a perception that if we are projecting a corporate image, then we're performing, and that is not true. And clearly, even the regulatory reforms were actually extremely neoliberal, which are exactly what has been embedded in terms of a value system for new public management.